Welcome back to our channel. Before we dive into yet another fascinating and mysterious stories, I would like to invite you to watch, to like, and subscribe to the channel. Also, activate the notification sound. Greetings, seeker of truth, witness to the unfolding scroll of history. Today, we turn our gaze to a story etched in fire and brimstone upon the pages of your sacred texts, a tale of two cities, Sodom and Gomorrah. Names that have become synonymous with wickedness and divine retribution. If you can, two bustling centers of human activity, nestled in a fertile plain, shimmering perhaps with wealth, power, and an air of unshakable pride. Imagine these vibrant hubs of life, reduced utterly, terrifyingly, to ash and ruin in a matter of mere hours. No invading armies marched against their walls, no earthquake split the ground beneath them. This was no natural disaster. No random cataclysm. This was judgment sent directly from heaven. Fire rained down, sulfur choked the land within moments. The laughter turned to screams, the pride to terror, the entire civilization erased from the face of the earth. What transpired in those final hours? What provoked such absolute, devastating judgment? And what kind of celestial beings, what manner of angels, move with such swiftness, such terrible power? Who could receive and execute such a terrifying divine order without hesitation, without faltering? Understand, this story is not merely about cataloging scenes, listing transgressions. It is about a threshold being crossed, a cry reaching heaven that could no longer be ignored. Is about a divine force, holy and just, responding to pervasive, unrepentant corruption. A force so potent, so resolute, that even the heartfelt prayers of the righteous patriarch Abraham could not ultimately stop the cleansing fire. In this reflection, we shall unveil, from our perspective as witnesses in the heavenly courts, how the angels of judgment descended upon Sodom. Why the patience of God reached its limit. Why He did not wait another day. And what timeless truths this ancient destruction holds for humanity. Even now, what if I told you that some of the most dangerous cities in history, cities ripe for judgment, were not necessarily filled with abject poverty, but rather with staggering, complacent wealth? This appears to have been the case with Sodom and Gomorrah. These twin cities, situated perhaps in the lush, well-watered plain near the Dead Sea before its transformation, were likely centers of commerce, abundance, perhaps even luxury. They shone from a distance, with the gleam of prosperity, overflowing with food, resources, material comfort. From afar, they might have resembled paradise, an oasis of plenty. But within the hearts of these wealthy, comfortable cities, something spiritually toxic, something terribly wrong, was festering and growing. The people of Sodom and Gomorrah, blessed with abundance, had allowed their prosperity to curdle into pride, arrogance, and profound cruelty. They had forgotten the fundamental laws of kindness, compassion, hospitality, laws written not just on stone tablets, but on the human heart itself. They possessed so much, yet instead of using their wealth to bless others, to show generosity, they wielded it as a tool of oppression, mockery, and calculated cruelty. Ancient traditions, seeking to understand the depth of their sin, tell stories that illustrate this chilling reality. Tales of laws designed to punish generosity, games made out of harming the poor, and vulnerable traps set for unsuspecting strangers who sought refuge or passage through their lands. The sacred duty of welcoming the traveler, the guest, a cornerstone of hospitality in that ancient world, was perverted in Sodom into an opportunity for abuse, exploitation, violation. One such harrowing tale, passed down through generations, speaks of a young woman named Poltith, believed by some to be Lot's daughter. Moved by compassion, she secretly defied Sodom's cruel norms by giving bread to a poor, starving man. When the city's leaders discovered her act of kindness, her crime of basic human decency, their punishment was designed for maximum cruelty and public spectacle. They reportedly covered her body with honey and placed her upon the city, while leaving her exposed, helpless, to be stung to death by swarms of bees. Whether literal history or illustrative legend, such stories capture the essence of Sodom's sin, a complete inversion of moral order, where kindness was punished and cruelty celebrated. Day society that had lost its soul, the Bible itself, through the prophet Ezekiel, provides a divine diagnosis centuries later, cutting through speculation to reveal the core rottenness. Behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food overfed, and prosperous ease, unconcerned, but did not aid help the poor and needy. Ezekiel 16:49. Notice the emphasis: bride born of prosperity abundance, leading not to gratitude, but to arrogant self-sufficiency, comfort breeding, apathy, a callous disregard for the suffering of others. The failure to help the poor and needy. Verse 50 adds, they were haughty, and did an abomination before me, so I removed them. When I saw it, their problem wasn't just isolated acts of private immorality, though other passages, like Genesis 19, reveal profound sexual depravity as well. It was a systemic breakdown, a societal embrace of pride, selfishness, injustice, and cruelty, a complete violation of the fundamental principles of treating others, especially the vulnerable, with dignity and respect. These were not quiet sins, hidden away in shame. The arrogance, the cruelty, the injustice, they were likely blatant, open, perhaps even celebrated within the city's culture, and the consequences were real. People were suffering, the poor were oppressed, the needy were ignored, strangers were abused. The cries of those they hurt, those they violated, those they neglected, began to accumulate day after day, voice after voice. Imagine thousands of unheard pleas, stifled sobs, desperate prayers rising from that wealthy, wicked plain. The anguish of the poor, the terror of the stranger, the despair of the oppressed. These weren't mere whispers lost on the wind, they were screams of injustice, piercing the veil between earth and heaven, reaching the very throne of the Almighty God. Hears, understand this, beloved soul. God always hears the cry of the oppressed, the afflicted, the unjustly treated. He heard the groans of the Israelites suffering under slavery in Egypt, and he responded with deliverance. He heard the blood of righteous Abel crying out from the ground after Cain murdered him, and he responded with justice. And now he heard the overwhelming, persistent cry ascending from the plain of Sodom and Gomorrah. The sheer volume, the intensity of the outcry against their wickedness demanded divine attention, as God himself stated to Abraham, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave. I will go down to see Genesis 18:20-21. Think about the gravity of that statement for a moment. The creator of the universe, the sustainer of galaxies, the eternal, omnipresent Spirit, declared his intention to go down, to personally investigate, to see for himself. Fifth, the reality on the ground matched the grievous outcry that had reached his ears. This wasn't because God lacked knowledge. His omniscient it was a divine expression of taking the matter with utmost seriousness. A formal investigation before judgment. It was like a cosmic alarm bell, ringing insistently, signaling that a critical threshold of sin and injustice had been crossed. The sound of so much cruelty, so much deliberate violation of divine and human law, had reached the very throne of heaven, and God could no longer withhold his direct attention. His impending judgment, when the cries of the deeply wounded, the systematically oppressed, reach heaven, God always responds. Justice, sooner or later, must roll down. Meanwhile, the people of Sodom, oblivious, continued their lives caught up in their wealth, their pleasures, their prideful games, their cruelties. Perhaps they felt secure behind their city walls. Perhaps they believed their riches made them untouchable, exempt from consequence. They had no idea that divine visitors, bearing both the potential for rescue and the mandate for judgment, were already on their way. They were utterly wrong about their security while Sodom simmered in its self-absorbed wickedness. Unaware of the approaching reckoning, a vastly different scene was unfolding elsewhere. Under the cool shade of ancient oak trees at a place called Mamre, near Hebron, a man known for his faith, his hospitality, his relationship with the Most High God, an old man named Abraham, was about to engage in the most audacious, most significant conversation of his entire life, a conversation that would directly impact the fate of those wicked cities, a conversation that reveals volumes about the character of God himself. But before we witness Abraham's incredible intercession, let us pause and reflect these ancient stories, beloved soul. are not just historical records of distant events, they are living mirrors, reflecting timeless truths about justice, mercy, and divine response. They demonstrate how God inevitably responds when power, wealth, or comfort are used not to bless, but to oppress and inflict pain. Perhaps, take a moment now, reflect on your own world. Where do you see cries of injustice rising? And consider affirming this truth by commenting below with the simple words, "Justice will come." It serves as a reminder to yourself and others that, in the end, no evil, no cry of the oppressed, goes unseen or unanswered by heaven. Your affirmation helps amplify this message of divine accountability and ultimate hope. Now, let us return to Abraham. Have you ever felt the urge to argue with God, to plead, to negotiate, to try and change his mind? Abraham did exactly that, and what happened next will surely deepen your understanding of God's heart, his justice, and his astonishing mercy. The day was hot, the Palestinian sun beat down. Abraham sat at the entrance of his tent, seeking refuge in the shade of the great oaks of Mamre. Was relatively peaceful for the patriarch at this moment. He had recently returned from a victorious military campaign, rescuing his nephew Lothi, was resting, perhaps contemplating God's promises. Suddenly, he looked up. Standing nearby were three men, three visitors who had appeared without announcement. Janasas dezoital, -2 in the culture of the ancient Near East. Hospitality towards travelers was not just a courtesy, it was a sacred duty, a deeply ingrained social and moral obligation. But Abraham's response went far beyond mere duty. It was immediate, enthusiastic, extravagant. He didn't wait for them to approach. He ran from his tent entrance to meet them. He bowed low to the ground, showing profound respect. He begged them not to pass by his humble dwelling. Genesis 18:3, "Let a little water be brought," he urged, "and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree." Genesis 18:2, "For, let me bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh yourselves." Genesis 18:5, he didn't offer leftovers. He offered his best. He hurried into the tent to Sarah, instructing her to quickly bake fresh cakes from the finest flour. Genesis 18:6, he ran to the herd, selected a choice, tender calf, and had his servant prepare it immediately. Genesis 18:7, he brought curds, milk, the roasted calf, the fresh bread, a veritable feast fit for royalty. And then, demonstrating utmost respect, he didn't sit with them, but stood by them under the tree while they ate, attending to their needs. Genesis 18:8, Abraham's actions exemplified perfect Near Eastern hospitality, rooted in generosity and reverence for the guest. What Abraham likely didn't fully realize at the very beginning of this encounter was the true identity of his mysterious visitors. These were no ordinary travelers. As they finished their meal, the conversation took a sudden, personal turn. One of them asked Abraham directly, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" Genesis 18:9, this question itself would have been startling. How did this stranger know his wife's name? Abraham replied, "She is in the tent." Then came the words that pierced through the veil of the ordinary, revealing the divine nature of the speaker. "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." Genesis 18:10, Sarah, listening secretly from inside the tent entrance, heard this, and she laughed silently to herself. Genesis 18:12, not necessarily a laugh of mockery, perhaps, but of incredulity. She was well past the age of childbearing. Abraham was also very old from a human perspective. It seemed utterly impossible, but the visitor, displaying knowledge beyond human limits, immediately addressed her silent, inner laughter. Why did Sarah laugh? He asked Abraham. Then came the pivotal question, echoing through eternity. Is anything too hard for the Lord? Genesis 18:13-14, he reiterated the promise. At the appointed time, I will return to you, about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. Sarah, afraid, tried to deny laughing. But the Lord knew. Genesis 18:15, in that moment, any remaining doubt about the identity of at least one of the visitors likely vanished from Abraham's mind. The knowledge of Sarah's name, the impossible promise of a son in their old age, the awareness of Sarah's silent laughter. These were Clear signs he was in the presence of the divine. This was no ordinary meeting under the Oakstewish and Christian tradition. Generally understands the three visitors as the Lord himself, likely a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ, or God manifesting visibly accompanied by two angels in human form. The divine conversation was far from over. It shifted from personal promise to impending judgment as the visitors prepared to leave, turning their faces towards the distant plain. Where Sodom lay, the Lord lingered, choosing to share his intentions with Abraham, his friend, his covenant partner. Genesis 18:16-19. Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? The Lord mused. Affirming Abraham's crucial role in his plan, then, he revealed the grave purpose of his going down. Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, I am going down to see if they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me, and, if not, I will know. Genesis 18:20-21. The two other visitors, the angels, proceeded onward towards Sodom. Their mission now becoming clear. Abraham remained standing before the Lord, hearing of the impending judgment. Abraham's heart sank not just with general concern, but with specific, personal anguish. His own nephew, Lot, the son of his deceased brother Haran, lived in Sodom with his wife and daughters. Genesis 13-12-13. Lot, whom Abraham had rescued from captivity just recently. Lot, his own flesh and blood. Would God destroy the righteous along with the wicked? Would Lot and his family perish in the coming destruction? Abraham, the friend of God, could not simply stand by passively and let this happen without speaking. Without pleading so, Abraham did something incredibly bold, remarkably courageous, deeply revealing of both his character and his understanding of God's justice. He drew near and began to negotiate with God Almighty to intercede for the cities. Primarily, one suspects, for the sake of his nephew, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Abraham began his plea, appealing directly to God's justice. Genesis 18:23. Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city, will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Genesis 18:24. Far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? Genesis 18:25. What an appeal, grounded in God's own character, his justice, and the Lord, patient, merciful, responded, if I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Genesis 18:26. But Abraham, emboldened, perhaps still fearful that 50 could not be found, pressed further. Yet with profound humility, behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. Genesis 18:27. Acknowledging his creatureliness before the Creator, suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? God replied, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. Genesis 18:28. Abraham continued, his courage growing alongside his humility, suppose 40 are found there. For the sake of 40, I will not do it. Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 are found there. I will not do it, if I find 30 there. Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there. For the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Finally, reaching the lowest number, he dared to propose, oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again. But this one, suppose 10 are found there. And God granted his final plea, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. Genesis 18:20, 9:32. Consider the magnificence of this momenta, mere human dust and ashes, standing face to face with the judge of all the earth, the sovereign Lord, respectfully, yet persistently, negotiating for mercy, appealing to God's own righteous character, and God, the Almighty, listening patiently, responding graciously, agreeing to spare entire cities for the sake of even a tiny remnant of righteous souls. This dialogue reveals something incredibly beautiful about God's heart. His justice is always tempered with mercy. He does not delight in destruction. He distinguishes between the righteous and the wicked. He listens to the intercession of his faithful servants Abraham's, Negotiation wasn't about changing God's mind against his will. It was about aligning with God's merciful heart, discovering the depths of his patience, and securing assurance based on God's own character. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows, the profound conversation ended. Had pushed as far as his faith and courage allowed. 10 righteous. Surely there must be at least 10 in those populous cities, especially with Lot living there. The Lord departed, his purpose clarified, his conditions for mercy established. Abraham returned to his tent, his heart likely heavy with a mixture of awe, hope, and lingering anxiety. Would even 10 righteous souls be found in places so infamous for their wickedness? What Abraham didn't know, as he returned to his dwelling, was that the 2 other visitors, the powerful angelic beings who had accompanied the Lord, were already nearing their destination. Their forms, likely appearing as ordinary men, approached the gates of Sodom's. Darkness began to envelop the city. They entered. They walked into a city utterly oblivious, lost in its routines, its pleasures, its cruelty. A city completely unaware that divine judgment, swift and terrible, was now walking its very streets, the question hanging heavy in the twilight. Air was stark and urgent. Would these heavenly messengers find even the bare minimum of 10 righteous people required to avert disaster? Or was Sodom already condemned, its wickedness having passed the point of no return? Beyond even the reach of Abraham's desperate plea, the fate of the cities rested on what the angels would find within Sodom's walls that night. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the plain, Lot, Abraham's nephew, sat near the main gate of the city of Sodom. Genesis 19:1. This wasn't just a casual resting spot. The city gate, in ancient times, was the hub of public life. It was where business transactions occurred, legal matters were settled, news was exchanged, and city elders gathered. Lot's presence there suggests he had attained some measure of civic standing, some level of integration into Sodom's society. Despite the city's pervasive wickedness, he was known, perhaps even respected in some capacity, and though he had chosen to dwell among them. The later New Testament description calls him righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked, tormented in his righteous soul day after day by their lawless deeds that he saw and heard. To Peter 2:27-28. He lived in Sodom, but was not entirely of Sodom. As darkness began to creep in, Lot looked up and saw 2 men, 2 strangers, approaching the city entrance. Perhaps there was something in their demeanor, their bearing, their aura, that seemed different, set apart. Or perhaps Lot, living in constant awareness of Sodom's dangers, was simply hypervigilant towards newcomers. Whatever the reason, Lot immediately recognized the potential peril these strangers faced. Especially entering Sodom after dark, he knew the character of his city. He knew the dangers that lurked in its shadows. He rose quickly to meet them, bowing low with his face to the ground, offering the traditional gesture of profound respect and hospitality. My lords, he addressed them urgently, please turn aside to your servants, house wash your feet, spend the night, and then you may rise early and go on your way. Genesis 19:2. His invitation was immediate, insistent, offering refuge, safety, and the customary rights of hospitality. At first, the 2 visitors, the angels in human disguise, politely refused Lot's offer. No, they replied, perhaps testing Lot's sincerity or the city's general atmosphere. We will spend the night in the town square. Genesis 19. To spend the night in the open square of an ancient city was not uncommon for travelers. But in Sodom, it was potentially lethal. Lot's heart surely raced. He knew what could happen to vulnerable strangers left unprotected in the streets of Sodom at night. He understood the predatory nature of the city's inhabitants. No, he insisted, urging them strongly, almost begging them, pleading with them not to stay outside. Genesis 19:3. His persistence revealed the depth of his concern, his awareness of the imminent danger, and the genuineness of his hospitality. Seeing his earnestness, the 2 angels relented and agreed to go with him to his home inside the relative safety of his house. Lot demonstrated true righteous hospitality, a stark contrast to the city's character. He showed them kindness, respect, provision. He had them wash the dust of their journey from their feet, A customary act of welcome and refreshment, he baked fresh, unleavened bread for them. Quickly he prepared a meal, a feast, honoring them as his guests. Genesis 19:3. This simple act of providing food, shelter, and safety to strangers stood out like a solitary bright light against the backdrop of a city notorious for its cruelty, its pride, its violation of these very principles. Lot, though living in Sodom, had not fully succumbed to Sodom's ways, but the fragile peace within Lot's home was destined to be short-lived before the guests could even lie down to rest for the night. Something terrifying began to unfold. Outside voices grew louder, angrier, more demanding. A commotion erupted in the street soon. Lot's house was completely surrounded, not just by a few drunken troublemakers or curious youths. The text emphasizes the totality, the citywide nature of the corruption. The men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people, to the last man, surrounded the house. Genesis 19:4. Every demographic, every corner of the city represented in this unified mob. Driven by wicked intent, their demand was chilling, revealing the depth of their depravity and their utter disregard for the sacred laws of hospitality. "Where are the men who came to you tonight?" they shouted menacingly at Lot's door. "Bring them out to us, that we may know them." Genesis 19:5. The verb to know yada in Hebrew in this context is widely understood as a euphemism for homosexual assault, a violent, degrading act intended to dominate and humiliate the strangers. This was the welcome Sodom offered. This was the perversion of hospitality. This was the outcry reaching heaven. The fire fell, the screams stopped, and in the silence, ash covered the land where pride once stood. The angels had done their task. They didn't hesitate, because heaven had already waited long enough. Not even 10 righteous could be found. Not even mercy could outweigh the cries of the broken Lot, and his daughters escaped with only the clothes on their backs. His wife looked back, longing for what was lost. She turned to salt, because some hearts never leave the city, even when their feet do. The smoke from Sodom rose like a pillar to the sky. Abraham stood watching from the hills. He didn't speak, he didn't celebrate. He knew what was lost, and maybe that's the most painful part. Not the fire, not the fact that it could have been different. Sodom didn't fall because they made mistakes. They fell because they stopped listening, they stopped caring, they believed their power made them untouchable. But heaven saw the beggar at the gate, heard the cries in the night, watched the cruelty dressed in gold, and heaven does not forget. So, what does this mean for us? It means God still hears the cries, He still watches cities, and He still sends angels, but He also waits, He gives time, He offers mercy, because judgment is never His first move, it's His last. So, if you hear this today, it's not to scare you, it's to wake you, to remind you that justice may delay, but it never forgets, and mercy, it's still here right now for anyone willing to choose kindness over cruelty, to be one of the 10, because sometimes all it takes to save a city is one person doing what's right. Subscribe and turn on all notifications. This is more than a soul tribe space for those ready to rise. You were guided here for a reason. Trust but tand. Now let the attracting begin. Drop a comments so I know you're with me. Tell me, what do you think? Let's talk about it below, and if you want more hidden revelations from scripture like this, hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, and share this with someone who's ready to go deeper. This channel is a place for revelation, not just religion. You belong here, and I'll see you in the next one.